The dust never settled at Forward Operating Base Sandstorm. It hung in the air like a curse, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that tasted like metal and disappointment. Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell stood outside the operations tent, her boots planted firm in the Iraqi sand. Listening to the laughter inside, they were laughing about her. Again. Can you believe they sent us a translator? Lieutenant Briggs's voice carried through the canvas walls. A female translator. What's she gonna do? Asked the enemy politely to surrender in Arabic. More laughter, loud, cruel. Sarah's jaw tightened. She'd heard worse. Much worse. In her 8 years of service, she'd been underestimated more times than she could count. Too young, too female, too quiet. The Army had taught her many things, but the hardest lesson was this. Prove yourself every single day, and still some men will never see you. She pushed through the tent flap. The laughter stopped. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Lieutenant Briggs sat at the head of the tactical table, his arms crossed over his chest like a barrier. Sergeant Morris smirked from the corner. Corporal Jackson looked away. The others just stared. Staff Sergeant Mitchell reporting as ordered, sir, Sarah said, her voice steady. Briggs looked her up and down like she was a piece of equipment he didn't order. Right, the translator. You're here for tomorrow's patrol into Al-Khazir village. We need someone who speaks the language. Try to keep up and stay out of the way. Stay out of the way. Sarah had heard those words before, at basic training, at her first deployment, at every assignment where men assumed her presence was a quota to fill, not a skill to utilize. Understood, sir, she replied. We roll out at 0600, Briggs continued, turning back to his map. It's a simple intel gathering mission. We talk to the village elder, get information on insurgent movement, and extract. Should be easy. Even for, he paused, glancing at her. Even with a translator. The unspoken words hung in the air, even with a woman. Sarah nodded once and left the tent. Outside, the sun was setting over the desert, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and purple. Beautiful and deadly, just like everything else in this place. She walked back to her quarters, a small plywood structure she shared with 2 other female soldiers who were currently on different rotations. Alone, she sat on her bunk and pulled out a worn photograph from her chest pocket. Her father, Sergeant Major David Mitchell, killed in action in Fallujah 12 years ago. I'm still here, Dad, she whispered to the photo. Still fighting. Her father had been a Green Beret, a legend. When Sarah joined the Army, everyone expected her to coast on his name. Instead, it became a weight she carried. Every mistake was proof she didn't deserve to wear the uniform. Every success was dismissed as favoritism or luck. What they didn't know, what Lieutenant Briggs and his team didn't know, was that Sarah Mitchell wasn't just a translator. Before her current assignment, she'd spent 3 years with a specialized intelligence unit. She'd run covert operations in 4 countries. She spoke 5 languages fluently. She trained with special forces, learned close quarters combat, tactical medicine, and advanced reconnaissance. She held expert marksman ratings with 7 different weapons. But after a mission in Syria went sideways, after she'd questioned orders that put civilians at risk, she'd been quietly reassigned, pushed aside, given the designation of translator and sent to FOB Sandstorm, where she was supposed to fade into the background. The Army didn't like women who spoke up, especially women who were right, so she kept her head down, did her job, swallowed the insults and the laughter, until tomorrow. The next morning came too fast. Sarah was up at 0500, checking her gear with the methodical precision her father had taught her. Rifle cleaned and loaded, medical kit stocked, radio charged, ammunition secured. She moved through the checklist like a prayer. The convoy assembled in the pre-dawn darkness. 3 vehicles, 15 soldiers. Lieutenant Briggs stood near the lead Humvee, barking orders and checking equipment. When Sarah approached, he barely glanced at her. You're in the 2nd vehicle. Middle seat. Stay alert and translate when we need you. That's it? Yes, sir. Sergeant Morris walked past, bumping her shoulder deliberately. Try not to slow us down, Princess. Sarah said nothing. She climbed into the Humvee and settled between 2 young privates who looked like they'd barely started shaving. They didn't speak to her, didn't acknowledge her. She was invisible. The convoy rolled out as the sun broke over the horizon. Al-Khazir village was 40 minutes northeast, through winding roads and open desert, where insurgents loved to plant IEDs. The route had been cleared twice, but that didn't mean much. The enemy was smart, patient, always watching. Sarah watched too. Her eyes scanned the landscape, noting every detail. The way the road curved, the abandoned vehicles on the shoulder, the buildings in the distance. Escape routes, cover positions, potential ambush points. Old habits from her intelligence training. Habits she couldn't turn off. The village appeared ahead, a cluster of sand-colored buildings surrounded by palm trees and dust. Peaceful. Quiet. Too quiet. Sarah's instincts screamed. Something was wrong. The streets were empty. No children playing. No merchants setting up stalls. No morning activity, sir, she said, leaning forward. Something's off. The village is— I didn't ask for your tactical assessment, Mitchell. Briggs cut her off. I asked you to translate. The convoy entered the village, and that's when the world exploded. The lead Humvee erupted in flames as an IED detonated beneath it. The explosion was deafening, a wall of heat and shrapnel that ripped through metal and flesh. Sarah's vehicle lurched to a stop, then the gunfire started. Bullets pinged off armor. Windows shattered. Men screamed, "Ambush! Ambush!" Someone yelled into the radio. Sarah's training kicked in instantly. She assessed the situation in seconds. They were boxed in. Insurgents firing from rooftops and windows. At least 20 hostiles, maybe more. The lead vehicle was destroyed. The third vehicle was taking heavy fire. Lieutenant Briggs was in that lead vehicle. "We need to move, now!" Sergeant Morris shouted, panic cracking his voice, but Sarah was already moving. She grabbed her rifle, kicked open the door, and stepped into hell. The heat from the burning Humvee hit Sarah's face like a furnace. Black smoke poured into the sky, thick and toxic. Bullets kicked up dirt at her feet. Chaos surrounded her, but her mind was crystal clear. This was what she'd trained for. This was who she really was. Cover. Get to cover! Sergeant Morris was screaming, frozen behind the vehicle door, his rifle shaking in his hands. Sarah dropped to one knee, brought her rifle up, and acquired her first target. An insurgent on a rooftop 40 yards out, AK-47 raised. She exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. One shot. The insurgent dropped. She pivoted. Second target. A window on the left. Another shooter. Another shot. Another hit. "Mitchell! What the hell are you—" Morris started, but she cut him off. "Suppress that rooftop. 2 shooters, 11 o'clock. Her voice was steel. Command voice. The voice of someone who'd done this before. She moved to the front of the vehicle, using it as cover, her eyes scanning the battlefield with the trained precision of a combat veteran. The ambush was well planned. Classic L-shaped formation. They'd funneled the convoy into a kill zone with overlapping fields of fire. Professional. Deadly. But Sarah had been in worse. "Morris, I need a head count." "Who's down?" she shouted. Morris stared at her like he'd never seen her before. I don't— "Now, Sergeant!" The authority in her voice snapped him out of his shock. "Lead vehicle is hit bad. Briggs and 3 others. Third vehicle has 2 wounded." Sarah's jaw clenched. 4 men in the lead vehicle. Briggs was in there. She grabbed the radio from her vest. "All units, this is Mitchell. Report status, static." Then a weak voice. "Third vehicle. We're pinned down. Can't move." The second vehicle's driver, Corporal Jackson, ducked down beside her, his eyes wide with terror. "What do we do?" "We're sitting ducks." "No," Sarah said, her eyes still scanning for threats. "We're soldiers, and we're getting out of here." She keyed the radio again. "Third vehicle, can you return fire?" "Negative. Johnson's hit. We need a medic." Sarah's mind raced through options. They were trapped in a linear ambush, taking fire from multiple positions. Standard doctrine said wait for air support or reinforcements. But the nearest backup was 20 minutes out. "In 20 minutes, they'd all be dead. She had to break the ambush. Listen to me." Sarah turned to Morris and Jackson. "We need to establish fire superiority and create an exit route. Morris, take 2 men and suppress those rooftop positions. Aimed fire, controlled bursts. Jackson, you're with me. We're getting to that lead vehicle." Morris shook his head. "Are you insane? We can't— You have a better plan, Sergeant?" Sarah's eyes locked on his. "Because right now I'm the only one giving orders. You can follow them or you can die here. Choose." Something shifted in Morris's face. Fear, maybe. Or recognition. He nodded. "Good, move on my mark." Sarah checked her ammunition. Full magazine. 2 spares on her vest. It would have to be enough. She counted down. 3, 2, 1. Go. Morris and his team opened fire, their bullets tearing into the rooftop positions. Sarah broke from cover, sprinting toward the burning lead vehicle with Jackson right behind her. Bullets snapped through the air around them. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. Just ran. They reached the Humvee. The front was completely destroyed, a twisted mess of metal and fire, but the back was intact. Briggs, can you hear me? Sarah yanked open the rear door. Lieutenant Briggs was slumped against the seat, blood running down his face from a gash on his forehead. His eyes were unfocused, dazed. Next to him, Private Chen was unconscious, his leg twisted at a wrong angle. The driver and front passenger were gone. Just gone. Mitchell? Briggs mumbled, confusion mixing with pain. What are you? Saving your life, sir. Jackson, help me get them out. Together, they pulled Chen from the vehicle first. He was heavy, dead weight, but Sarah had done this before. Fireman carries. Extraction under fire. All part of the training no one knew she had. Jackson lifted Chen onto his shoulders and started running back to cover. Sarah reached for Briggs. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. I can walk, he said, tried fighting through the pain. Then walk fast. Sir? She helped him out of the vehicle just as an RPG screamed overhead, missing them by meters and exploding against a nearby building. The shockwave knocked them both to the ground. Sarah's ears rang. Dust and debris rained down. For a moment, everything moved in slow motion. She saw the insurgents repositioning, saw Morris's team running low on ammunition, saw the third vehicle still trapped and taking fire. They were losing. She pulled Briggs to his feet and dragged him toward cover. Bullets chased them every step. When they reached the second vehicle, she dropped him behind it and grabbed the radio. All units, listen up. We're breaking out of this kill zone. Third vehicle. On my command, you're going to reverse 50 meters and take position behind that stone wall at 6 o'clock. Second vehicle will provide covering fire. We execute in 30 seconds. Who authorized this? A voice crackled back. Sarah looked at Briggs. He was leaning against the Humvee, blood dripping from his head, barely conscious. I did, she said into the radio. Anyone have a problem with that? Silence. Good. Morris, I need suppressing fire on those windows. Empty your magazines if you have to. Make them keep their heads down. On it, Morris shouted back. For the first time, there was no mockery in his voice. Only respect, Sarah counted down. 15 seconds. 10 seconds. She raised her rifle and sighted on the nearest threat. A fighter ducking behind a doorway, waiting to shoot at the third vehicle when it moved. 5, 4, 3, 2, go! The world erupted in gunfire. Morris and his team unleashed everything they had. Bullets tore through windows, chipped stone, shredded wood. The insurgents ducked for cover. The third vehicle's engine roared to life. It lurched backward, tires spinning, racing in reverse down the road. Sarah fired. Once, twice, 3 times. Each shot deliberate. Each shot hitting its mark. The third vehicle reached the stone wall and swung into position. Safe. Second vehicle. We're next. Jackson, you drive. Morris, your rear gunner. They moved like a machine. Jackson jumped into the driver's seat. Morris climbed to the mounted gun. Sarah pulled Briggs into the back and climbed in after him. Go! Go, go! The Humvee surged forward, engine screaming. Bullets hammered the armor. The windshield cracked. But Jackson kept driving, his knuckles white on the wheel. Sarah leaned out the window and fired back at the insurgents, covering their escape. Her shots were precise, controlled, professional. One by one, the enemy fighters fell back. The Humvee reached the stone wall and skidded to a stop next to the third vehicle. They were out of the immediate kill zone, protected by the wall, still taking fire but no longer trapped. Sarah jumped out and assessed the situation. 2 dead, 4 wounded, low on ammunition, but alive. Briggs stumbled out after her, his hand pressed to his bleeding head. He stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. He started. How did you? Sarah met his eyes. I'm not just a translator, sir. Before he could respond, the radio crackled. All units, this is Overwatch. We have Apache inbound, ETA 3 minutes. Hang tight, 3 minutes. They could hold for 3 minutes. Sarah moved among the wounded, checking injuries, applying pressure to bleeding wounds, speaking calmly to the scared young soldiers who minutes ago had ignored her existence. Morris approached, his face covered in dust and sweat. Mitchell, I don't know what the hell you are, but thank you, she nodded once. We're not done yet, Sergeant. Get your men ready to move when those Apaches clear the area. Yes, ma'am. He actually said ma'am. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder. Then the Apaches appeared, black shadows against the sun, beautiful and terrible. Their chain guns opened fire, tearing through the insurgent positions with devastating precision. The enemy scattered, fled, disappeared into the buildings and alleys like smoke. It was over. Sarah stood at the wall, rifle still raised, watching the village for any remaining threats. Her heart was pounding, adrenaline burning through her veins, but her hands were steady. Behind her, Lieutenant Briggs sat against the Humvee, staring at her with wide eyes. He finally understood. She wasn't just a translator. She never had been. The medevac helicopters arrived 15 minutes later, kicking up sand and dust as they touched down. Medics rushed out with stretchers, moving with practiced efficiency. Sarah helped load the wounded, her hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. Private Chen went first, still unconscious. Then the two wounded from the third vehicle. Finally, Lieutenant Briggs, he refused the stretcher. "I can walk," he insisted, though he swayed on his feet. Sarah caught his arm, steadying him. "Sir, you need medical attention." Briggs looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived at FOB Sandstorm. "Who are you, Mitchell?" "Really? Later, sir. Get on that helicopter." He nodded slowly and let the medics guide him aboard, but his eyes never left her face. The helicopters lifted off, banking hard toward the base. Sarah watched them disappear into the sky, then turned to the remaining soldiers. 8 men, including Morris and Jackson, all of them staring at her. The silence stretched out. Finally, Morris spoke. "You're not a translator." "I am a translator," Sarah said calmly. "I'm also other things." "What things?" Jackson asked. His voice wasn't hostile, just confused. "You moved like special forces. Those shots you made, that was expert level." Sarah checked her rifle, keeping her hands busy. "We need to secure this position until the convoy arrives to extract us." Morris set up a perimeter watch. "Jackson, check our ammunition and supplies." "Mitchell," Morris started. "Now, Sergeant." The command in her voice was absolute. Morris hesitated for only a second, then nodded. "You heard her. Move." The men scattered to their assignments. Sarah walked to the edge of the stone wall and scanned the village. Smoke still rose from the burning Humvee. The streets remained empty. The insurgents were gone, but that didn't mean they wouldn't come back. She pulled out her radio and contacted base. "FOB Sandstorm, this is Mitchell. Ambush neutralized. Requesting immediate extraction for remaining personnel." The voice that answered was Colonel Hendricks, the base commander. "Mitchell, where's Lieutenant Briggs?" "Medevaced with head trauma, sir. I have 8 soldiers here holding position. We're secure but exposed." A pause. "You took command?" "Yes, sir." Another pause, longer this time. "Extraction convoy is rolling now. ETA 20 minutes. Hold your position, Staff Sergeant." "Understood, sir." She lowered the radio and closed her eyes for a brief moment. 20 minutes. Then she'd have to face the questions. The doubts. The investigation into why a translator had taken tactical command of a combat situation. The Army didn't like surprises, especially from women who were supposed to stay quiet. Footsteps behind her. She turned to find Jackson standing there, his expression uncertain. "Staff Sergeant, I just wanted to say, you saved our lives back there." Sarah shook her head. "We saved each other." "That's how it works." "No," Jackson insisted. "We were panicking, freezing. Morris didn't know what to do. Briggs was down. If you hadn't taken charge," he trailed off. "Why didn't anyone tell us?" "About what you can do?" "Because no one knew," Sarah said quietly. "And no one was supposed to find out." Jackson frowned. "I don't understand." Sarah looked out at the desert, at the endless sand and sky. 3 years ago, I was part of a specialized intelligence unit. We ran operations in places that officially don't exist. I was good at my job. Really good. But during a mission in Syria, my commanding officer ordered an airstrike on a building we believed held enemy combatants. She paused, the memory sharp as glass. I had intelligence that civilians were sheltering there. Women, children. I told him. He didn't care. He wanted the target and he didn't care about collateral damage. Jackson waited, silent. "So I refused to confirm the coordinates," Sarah continued. "I broke protocol. Went over his head to stop the strike. I was right. There were 17 civilians in that building. I saved their lives. Then, You're a hero, Jackson said. Sarah laughed bitterly. No, I was a problem. A female soldier who questioned a male superior officer, who made him look bad. The civilians were saved, but my career was destroyed. I was quietly reassigned, given the designation of translator and sent to places where I couldn't cause trouble. Where I was supposed to disappear. That's not right. That's the army, Sarah said. At least that's the army for women who speak up. Jackson shook his head, anger flashing across his face. After today, they can't ignore you. You just saved an entire unit. Briggs will have to put you in for a commendation. Hell, a medal. Sarah smiled sadly. You'd think that, wouldn't you? Before Jackson could respond, Morris called out. Convoy's here. 4 armored vehicles appeared on the road, moving fast and kicking up dust. They pulled up to the position and soldiers poured out, securing the area and checking on the survivors. Captain Reynolds emerged from the lead vehicle. He was in his 40s, career Army, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that missed nothing. He walked straight to Sarah. Staff Sergeant Mitchell. Sir, Colonel Hendricks wants to see you immediately. Sarah nodded. She'd expected this. Yes, sir. She climbed into the vehicle with Reynolds. The ride back to base was silent. The captain didn't ask questions, didn't make small talk. Just watched her with those calculating eyes. Fob sandstorm appeared ahead, a sprawl of barriers and buildings surrounded by wire and guard towers. The convoy passed through the gate and rolled to a stop outside the command building. This way, Reynolds said. Sarah followed him inside. Through corridors she'd walked 100 times but never been welcomed in. Soldiers stopped and stared as she passed. Word traveled fast on a base. They already knew. Reynolds led her to Colonel Hendricks' office and knocked. Come in, a voice called. The office was sparse. A desk, a map on the wall, an American flag in the corner. Colonel Hendricks sat behind the desk, his fingers steepled in front of him. He was a tall man, lean and hard, with silver hair cut military short. Standing beside him was another man. Civilian clothes, dark suit, sunglasses even though they were indoors. Sarah's instincts prickled. Intelligence. Had to be. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, Hendricks said. Take a seat. Sarah sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, ready for whatever came next. Hendricks leaned back in his chair. I just got off the phone with Lieutenant Briggs. He's going to be fine, by the way. Concussion and some stitches, but he'll recover. He gave me a very interesting report about what happened in Al-Khazir. Sarah said nothing. According to Briggs, you single-handedly took command of a combat situation, executed a tactical extraction under fire, and saved the lives of every soldier in that convoy. Hendricks paused. That's quite impressive for a translator. I did what was necessary, sir. Yes, you did. Hendricks glanced at the man in the suit. Which raises some questions, such as why a soldier with your skill set was assigned to translation duty in the first place. The man in the suit stepped forward. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, I'm Agent Cordell with Defense Intelligence. I'm familiar with your file. Your real file. Sarah's jaw tightened. Here it comes. Cordell continued. 3 years ago, you were removed from active operational duty following an incident in Syria. You were deemed unsuitable for field command and reassigned to support roles. That's one way to describe it, Sarah said quietly. The official reason was insubordination, Cordell said. But the real reason was that you embarrassed a superior officer. A superior officer who, I should mention, was relieved of command 6 months later for multiple violations of engagement protocols. Sarah's head snapped up. What? You were right about that airstrike, Hendricks said. You were right about the civilians, and you were punished for it anyway. For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak. 3 years. 3 years of being sidelined, dismissed, mocked. 3 years of swallowing her pride and accepting a punishment she didn't deserve. And she'd been right all along. Why are you telling me this? She finally asked. Cordell and Hendricks exchanged a look. Then Cordell smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. Because, Staff Sergeant Mitchell, we have a problem, and we think you're exactly the right person to solve it. Sarah's instincts screamed warning. What kind of problem? Hendricks leaned forward. The ambush today wasn't random. It was too well coordinated. Too precise. Someone fed the insurgents intelligence about that patrol, about the route, about the timing. You're saying we have a leak, Sarah said. We're saying we have a traitor, Cordell corrected. Someone on this base is passing information to the enemy, and that someone just tried to get you and your entire unit killed. Sarah felt ice slide down her spine. We need someone who can investigate without raising suspicion, Hendricks continued. Someone who's been underestimated. Someone everyone thinks is just a translator. Cordell's smile widened. Someone like you, Sarah looked between them. This was a test. Another mission. Another chance to prove herself, or another chance to be burned. And if I say no, she asked. Then the traitor keeps operating, Hendricks said, and more soldiers die. Sarah thought of the men in that convoy, thought of Briggs bleeding and confused, thought of Chen's broken leg, thought of the 2 soldiers who died in the burning Humvee. She thought of her father. She met Hendricks's eyes. What do you need me to do? The investigation began quietly. Sarah returned to her routine as if nothing had changed. She showed up for translation duties. She kept her head down. She let the other soldiers see exactly what they expected, just a translator who got lucky during an ambush. But at night, in Colonel Hendricks' office, she became someone else entirely. We have 3 potential suspects, Agent Cordell said, spreading photographs across the desk. All 3 have access to patrol schedules and route information. All 3 have been on base for over a year. Sarah studied the faces. Captain Reynolds, Master Sergeant Torres, Lieutenant Vance, what's the evidence? She asked. Circumstantial, Cordell admitted. Unusual communications patterns. Unexplained absences, financial irregularities. Nothing concrete enough to make an arrest. Which is where you come in, Hendricks said. You'll observe them, listen, watch. People talk around translators. They forget you're even there. Sarah nodded slowly. It was true. She'd been invisible for 3 years. Now that invisibility would be her weapon. What am I looking for? Anything that doesn't fit, Cordell said. The traitor has to communicate with the insurgents somehow. Dead drops, coded messages, radio frequencies. Find the method and we find our traitor. Sarah took the photographs. When do I start? You already have, Hendricks said. As of now, you're assigned as a rotating translator for all 3 suspects. You'll accompany them to meetings, briefings, and operations. Stay close, stay quiet, and report everything. For the next 5 days, Sarah became a shadow. She followed Captain Reynolds through supply inspections, listening to him bark orders at subordinates. He was harsh, demanding, but nothing seemed out of place. His communications were all logged and proper. She sat in on Master Sergeant Torres's intelligence briefings, translating local informant reports. Torres was meticulous, professional, asking detailed questions about insurgent movements. But again, nothing unusual. Lieutenant Vance was different. Younger, ambitious, always looking for advancement. He treated Sarah with barely concealed contempt, making jokes about babysitters and dead weight. But his patrol schedules were standard. His reports were thorough, dead end after dead end. On the 6th day, Sarah sat in the mess hall eating alone as always, when Sergeant Morris dropped into the seat across from her. You're being wasted on translation duty, he said without preamble. Sarah looked up, surprised. Sergeant? Everyone knows what you did out there, Morris continued. You should be training units, leading missions. Instead, they've got you following officers around with a notepad. It's bullshit, Sarah smiled slightly. It's my assignment. Yeah, well, your assignment is wrong. Morris leaned forward. Look, I know I was a jerk to you before. We all were. But you proved yourself. You're a warrior. You deserve respect. Thank you, Sergeant. Morris stood, then hesitated. For what it's worth. We're lucky to have you here, even if the brass is too stupid to see it. He walked away, leaving Sarah staring at her tray. Respect. She'd finally earned it, but it had come too late. After today's briefing with Vance, she'd have to report to Hendricks that the investigation was going nowhere. She stood and headed to the operations center. Lieutenant Vance was waiting outside, checking his watch impatiently. You're late, Mitchell. Sorry, sir. I don't care. We have a meeting with a local informant in 10 minutes. Try to keep up. They walked to a small interrogation room where a nervous Iraqi man sat, flanked by 2 guards. Vance sat across from him and pulled out a notepad. Ask him about insurgent activity near the eastern checkpoint, Vance ordered. Sarah translated. The man answered in rapid Arabic, his eyes darting around the room. He says there's been increased movement, Sarah relayed. Vehicles coming and going at night. Maybe 20 men, Vance scribbled notes. Ask him when. Sarah translated again. The informant replied, but something in his tone made her pause. A slight emphasis on certain words. A pattern. She'd heard that pattern before. What did he say? Vance demanded. He says, 2 days from now. Thursday night. Sarah kept her voice neutral, but her mind was racing. The informant wasn't just giving information. He was receiving it. The pattern in his speech. It was a confirmation code. She'd learned it during her intelligence training. A way to verify that a message had been received without arousing suspicion, which meant Vance had just passed information to the enemy, right in front of her. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. Vance. It was Vance. She finished the interview on autopilot, translating questions and answers while her mind worked through the implications. Vance had access to patrol schedules. He'd known about the Al-Khazir mission. He'd sent them into that ambush. When the meeting ended, Vance stood and stretched. File your report with the usual summary, Mitchell. I have another meeting. Yes, sir. She watched him leave, then turned to the informant. In Arabic, she said quietly, Who are you really working for? The man's eyes widened. I don't answer me, Sarah said, her voice hard. Or I tell those guards you're an insurgent spy. Fear flickered across his face. The lieutenant, he pays me. I give him what he wants. What does he want? Information. Troop movements. Patrol schedules. And I pass messages back to my cousins in Al-Khazir. Sarah's blood ran cold. Vance wasn't just leaking information. He was actively coordinating with the enemy. She grabbed the informant by his shirt. How does he pay you? Cash in a bag. He leaves it at the old well outside the wire, and I pick it up. A dead drop. Classic tradecraft. Sarah released him and stepped back. When's the next drop? Tonight. Midnight. She had him. 3 hours later, Sarah crouched in the darkness outside the base perimeter, watching the old well through night vision goggles. Agent Cordell was beside her, weapon ready. 20 meters away, a team of MPs waited in the shadows. You're sure about this? Cordell whispered. I'm sure, Sarah said. They waited. The desert night was cold and silent. Minutes crawled past, then a figure appeared, moving carefully through the darkness. Lieutenant Vance. He approached the well, glancing around nervously, then pulled a canvas bag from his jacket and placed it inside the well's opening. Got him, Cordell breathed. Wait, Sarah said. Let's see if there's more. Vance stepped back from the well, then pulled out a small radio. He spoke into it, too quiet for Sarah to hear, but she saw his lips move. Coordinating, planning, betraying. How many soldiers had died because of him? How many ambushes had he enabled? Rage burned in Sarah's chest, hot and bright. Cordell signaled the MPs. They moved in fast and silent, surrounding Vance before he knew what was happening. Freeze! Hands up! Vance spun, reaching for his sidearm, but Sarah was already there. She crossed the distance in 3 strides and slammed into him, taking him to the ground with a textbook tackle. His weapon flew from his hand. She pressed her knee into his back and wrenched his arms behind him, securing them with flex cuffs. Staff Sergeant Mitchell? Vance gasped, sand in his mouth. What? What is this? This is the end, Lieutenant, Sarah said coldly. You're under arrest for treason. The MPs hauled him to his feet. Cordell retrieved the bag from the well, opened it, and pulled out stacks of cash. $20,000, Cordell said. How much is an American life worth to you, Vance? Vance's face twisted with fear and anger. You can't prove anything. I was meeting an informant. This is a misunderstanding. We have the informant's testimony, Sarah said. We have the money. We have you on camera making the drop. And we have the radio transmission you just sent. She leaned closer. You sent my unit into that ambush. 2 men died because of you. Vance's expression crumbled. They promised me a fortune. I have debts. I didn't think anyone would actually die. Well, they did, Sarah said. And now you're going to pay for it. The MPs dragged him away, still protesting, still making excuses. Cordell turned to Sarah. Hell of a catch, Staff Sergeant. You just saved a lot of lives. Sarah watched the MP's vehicle disappear toward the base. I just did my job. No, Cordell said. You did a lot more than that. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in Colonel Hendrix's office again. This time, the entire command staff was there. Captain Reynolds, Master Sergeant Torres, Sergeant Morris, Corporal Jackson, And Lieutenant Briggs, his head still bandaged but his eyes clear. Hendricks stood at attention. Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, front and center. Sarah stepped forward. For exceptional bravery under fire, for taking command during a combat emergency, and for uncovering a traitor who posed a direct threat to American lives, I am proud to award you the Bronze Star with Valor device. He pinned the medal to her uniform. The room erupted in applause, but Hendricks wasn't finished. Furthermore, your previous assignment designation has been reviewed and found to be inaccurate. Effective immediately, you are reinstated to full operational status with a promotion to Sergeant First Class. You will be taking command of the base's Tactical Intelligence Unit. Sarah's breath caught. A promotion. Command. Everything she'd lost returned. Thank you, sir, she managed. Briggs stepped forward, his hand extended. I owe you my life, Sergeant. And I owe you an apology. I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again. Sarah shook his hand. No apology necessary, sir. You just needed to see who I really am. We all did, Morris added, grinning. Turns out you're a badass. Laughter filled the room. Real laughter. Not mockery, but respect. That night, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, holding the Bronze Star in one hand and her father's photograph in the other. I did it, Dad, she whispered. I proved them wrong. Just like you taught me. She'd been mocked, dismissed, underestimated, but she'd never stopped being a warrior. They thought she was just a translator until she showed them the truth. 3 months later, Sergeant First Class Sarah Mitchell stood in front of her new team, 12 soldiers, 6 men and 6 women, all looking at her with respect and attention. Listen up, she said. I don't care what you did before you got here. I don't care about your gender, your background, or your past mistakes. All I care about is whether you can do the job. Can you think under pressure? Can you lead when it matters? Can you save lives? She paused, looking each of them in the eye. Because that's what we do here. We save lives. And we never ever give up. Understood? Yes, Sergeant, they shouted in unison. Sarah smiled. This was who she was meant to be. Not just a translator, not just a soldier, a leader, and nobody would ever make her forget it again.